At my retirement party, my son-in-law was wearing my father's watch. I knew he was my wife's lover. At that moment, I pulled out an envelope that took everyone's breath away. My wife opened it with trembling hands, and on the very first line, she realized she had lost everything. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." I never imagined my retirement party would be the night I'd finally understand what betrayal truly felt like. After 35 years as a registered nurse, watching over patients, healing wounds, and comforting families in their darkest hours, I thought I deserved a celebration. Instead, I got a masterclass in cruelty served on a silver platter. The hospital conference room was decorated with blue and white streamers, my favorite colors. Colleagues who had become family over the decades filled the space with warm laughter and congratulations. The cake read, "Happy Retirement, Alexander," in elegant script, and for a moment, I felt genuinely happy. At 58, I was finally free to pursue the things I'd put on hold: gardening, reading, maybe even traveling like Kaylin and I had always talked about. That's when I saw him. Ethan, my son-in-law, glided into the room with a confidence that made my heart stop. Not because he looked sharp, though he did. Not because he commanded attention, though he did. I froze because the watch glinting on his wrist caught the light just so. I knew every scuff on that brushed steel bezel, every hairline crack on the crystal, the faded engraving on the case back. To A, keep time with your heart. Dad. It was my father's watch. The same watch Dad wore to his own retirement party 28 years ago before cancer took him just 2 years later. The watch I'd carefully preserved in a small velvet-lined box in my desk, saving it for special moments with my family. The watch I had planned to wear tonight, until Kaylin had casually mentioned that I should go with the safe beige suit she'd bought me instead. She'd said the watch felt too sentimental for a work event. My hands trembled as I gripped my champagne glass. He hadn't asked to borrow it. He'd simply taken it, or someone had handed it to him, from the drawer in my study, where it rested like a sacred relic. The audacity was breathtaking. But what shattered me completely was the way he moved through the room, confident, relaxed, glancing once at the dial as if he belonged in my father's memory more than I did. "Doesn't Ethan look sharp tonight?" Kaylin appeared beside me, her voice warm with an admiration that used to be reserved for me. My wife of 30 years, the woman who'd held me through my father's funeral, who knew exactly what that watch meant to me, was practically glowing as she watched our daughter's husband work the room. I opened my mouth to tell her, to explain the significance, to ask how she could let this happen. But then I saw it. The look that passed between them when Ethan caught her eye across the room. It lasted maybe 3 seconds, but it told a story that made my blood run cold. The slight tilt of her head, the way his eyes lingered on her face, then dropped almost subconsciously to the watch, as if acknowledging a shared secret. The small, secret smile they shared before, quickly looking away, as if they'd been caught doing something they shouldn't. My champagne glass slipped from my fingers, shattering against the floor with a sound that seemed to echo through my entire world. Several colleagues rushed over, concerned about the mess, about whether I was hurt. But I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but stare at my wife and my son-in-law as the terrible truth settled into my bones like a cancer. They were having an affair. "Dad, are you okay?" Sophia appeared at my side, her kind eyes full of worry. Sweet Sophia, who'd inherited my calm nature and Kaylin's quick wit. Sophia, who worked 2 jobs alongside Ethan to get ahead and had no idea her husband was destroying her family from the inside. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I managed, forcing a smile that felt like broken glass against my lips. "Just clumsy." But I wasn't fine. As I watched Kaylin's protective hand settle lightly on Ethan's lower back while he bent to help with the broken glass. As I saw the way he leaned into her touch for just a moment too long, I realized my entire life had been built on lies I'd been too trusting to see. The rest of the party passed in a blur of congratulations and well wishes that felt hollow against the roar of betrayal in my ears. I smiled. I thanked people. I cut the cake with steady hands while my world crumbled around me. But all the while, I was cataloging details, filing away every glance, every touch, every moment of intimacy between my wife and the man who'd married my daughter just 2 years ago. When Kaylin approached me near the end of the evening, her voice syrupy sweet, I thought she might apologize, might offer some explanation for the vanishing of my most precious heirloom. Instead, she smiled that practiced smile that had fooled us all. You don't mind that Ethan dressed up with something special, do you, Alex? I thought your father's style deserved one last spin under the lights. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. She knew exactly what she was doing, exactly what that watch meant, exactly how much it would hurt me to see it on another man's wrist, his wrist, while they destroyed my family. This wasn't an accident or a thoughtless mistake. This was a message. I looked into her eyes, those clear green eyes that had once seemed so gentle when we first built our life, and saw something cold and calculating staring back at me. She wanted me to know. She wanted me to understand that she could take anything of mine she wanted, even the pieces of my father I had left. And there wasn't a damn thing I could do about it. That's when I reached into my jacket and touched the envelope. It was cream-colored, thick paper that felt substantial between my fingers. I'd been carrying it for weeks, waiting for the right moment, though I'd never imagined it would be this moment in this place with half my former colleagues still celebrating my retirement around us. Kaylin? I called softly, my voice cutting through the ambient conversation like a blade. She turned from where she'd been standing near the refreshment table, probably planning her next stolen glance with Ethan. When she saw what I was holding, her face went completely white. I think it's time you open this. The room didn't fall silent all at once. It was more like dominoes falling, conversation stopping in waves as people noticed the tension crackling between us. Kaylin's hands shook as she reached for the envelope, and I saw Ethan's confident mask slip for just a moment, revealing the fear underneath. They thought I was the naive, devoted husband who would never suspect, never question, never fight back. They thought 35 years of caring for others had made me weak, had taught me only to nurture and forgive. They had no idea what they'd awakened. Kaylin's trembling fingers fumbled with the envelope's edge, but I wasn't ready for her to open it yet. Not when the room was full of my colleagues, not when Sophia was standing there looking confused and concerned. This revelation required a more intimate setting where the full weight of their betrayal could land properly. Not here, I said quietly, taking the envelope back from her shaking hands. This is a family matter. The drive home was the longest 20 minutes of my life. Kaylin sat rigid in the passenger seat, stealing glances at me like I was a bomb that might explode at any moment. Ethan and Sophia followed in their car, and I could see his animated gestures in my rearview mirror as he probably tried to convince my daughter that her father was having some kind of breakdown. He had no idea how carefully I'd planned this moment. It had started 6 months ago with something as simple as laundry. I was putting away Kaylin's sweaters when I found a receipt in her pocket. Dinner for 2 at Romano's, our special restaurant, on a Tuesday night when she told me she was working late. The meal cost $112, far more than Kaylin would ever spend on a casual dinner. At first I made excuses. Maybe she'd taken a client out. Maybe she'd treated Sophia to a nice meal. Maybe the receipt wasn't even from that Tuesday. But something nagged at me. The way things nag at a nurse when the symptoms don't quite add up to the obvious diagnosis. So, I started paying attention. I noticed how Kaylin's phone was always face down now. How she'd started showering as soon as she got home from work. How she'd suddenly developed an interest in fitness and bought new clothes without telling me. I watched how Ethan's visits became more frequent after he left his last job. How he always seemed to time them for when Sophia was at work. But the moment I knew, really knew, was 3 months ago when I came home early from my book club. Margaret had canceled at the last minute with a migraine, so instead of discussing where the crawdads sing over wine and cheese, I found myself pulling into my own driveway at 7:30 on a Thursday evening. Kaylin's car was there, which wasn't unusual. What was unusual was seeing Ethan's silver Honda parked around the corner, almost hidden behind the Johnson's oak tree. My heart hammered as I let myself into the house through the garage, moving as quietly as my nursing shoes would allow. I could hear voices from the living room, low, intimate. punctuated by laughter I'd never heard Kaylin make with me. "He's so oblivious." Ethan's voice drifted down the hallway, light and careless, even while delivering poison. "Sometimes I think he actually enjoys being the tireless caretaker while we find our happiness elsewhere." Kaylin's response was soft, but I caught enough. After the retirement party, we won't have to pretend much longer. I stood frozen in my own hallway, listening to them plan the destruction of my life with the casual tone people use to discuss weekend plans. They talked about me like I was already gone, already erased from the equation of their future together. That night, after Ethan left through the back door and Kaylin pretended she'd been watching television alone all evening, I lay awake staring at the ceiling and made a decision. I wasn't going to confront them in the heat of the moment. I wasn't going to scream or cry or beg. I was going to do what 35 years as a nurse had taught me to do: gather information, analyze the situation, and develop a treatment plan. The next morning, I hired a private investigator. His name was Marcus Webb, a former police detective who specialized in infidelity cases. He was kind, but matter-of-fact, like the doctors I'd worked with who had to deliver devastating diagnoses with gentle professionalism. "I need to know everything," I told him during our first meeting at a coffee shop across town. "How long it's been going on, what they're planning, whether my daughter knows." Marcus was thorough. Within 2 weeks, he documented 17 separate meetings between Kaylin and Ethan. They met at hotels, restaurants, even in my own house when they thought I wouldn't be home. The photos were professionally shot, but devastating in their clarity. Kaylin's hand on Ethan's thigh at a restaurant booth. Them kissing in the parking lot of the Marriott. Ethan leaving our house at noon on a Tuesday when he'd told Sophia he was helping a friend move. But Marcus uncovered something even worse than the affair itself. "Mr. Hale," he said during our final meeting, sliding a folder across the table with the careful precision of a surgeon delivering news about a terminal illness. "I think you need to see this." Inside were copies of documents I'd never seen before. Bank statements showing transfers from our joint savings account to an account in Ethan's name only. Real estate paperwork initiating a quitclaim deed for our house. The house Kaylin and I had bought together 30 years ago. The house where we'd raised Sophia. The house where I'd planned to spend my retirement. Prepared to move into an LLC managed by Ethan. Kaylin had been systematically stealing my financial security and handing it to her lover. "The house transfer was finalized 2 weeks ago," Marcus said gently. "The bank transfers had been happening gradually over the past 8 months, always amounts small enough to avoid triggering automatic notifications. 8 months. Kaylin had been planning to leave me for 8 months, carefully moving our assets out of my reach while I planned retirement parties and dreamed about traveling together. "There's more," Marcus continued, and I realized the folder was thicker than I'd first noticed. "Your son-in-law has been very busy. He's been meeting with a divorce attorney, getting advice on how to protect assets in the event of a marriage dissolution. The attorney specializes in cases where one spouse has significant assets that need to be preserved." The room spun around me. This wasn't just an affair born of passion or midlife crisis. This was a calculated business transaction with me as the asset being liquidated. Now, sitting in our living room with Kaylin, Sophia, and Ethan, arranged like players in a drama they didn't know they were performing, I felt the weight of that knowledge like armor. They thought I was weak, gullible, easily discarded. They had no idea I'd spent months building a case against them with the same methodical precision I'd once used to track patient symptoms and medication schedules. Kaylin kept glancing at the envelope in my hands, sweat beading on her forehead despite the air conditioning. "Alexander, maybe we should discuss this privately." "No," I said firmly. "Sophia deserves to know what kind of man she married. Don't you think it's time for some honesty in this family?" Ethan's laugh was bright and artificial. "Really, Alex? You're being dramatic. Whatever you think you know." I opened the envelope and pulled out the first photograph. Kaylin and Ethan kissing in the parking lot of the Comfort Inn. A timestamp showed it was taken just last Tuesday while Sophia was at work and I was supposedly at my doctor's appointment. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, marking the seconds until everything changed forever. The photograph landed on the coffee table like a grenade, with the pin pulled out. For a moment, nobody moved. Sophia's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, denial, and then a devastating understanding that made my heart break for her all over again. "Dad?" Her voice was small, like when she was a child and had found our dog lying lifeless in the backyard. She was looking at me, not at the photo, not at her husband or her mother, but at me, as if I could somehow make this not be real. Kaylin lunged forward, her hand reaching for the photograph. "Alex, you don't understand." "Don't." The word came out sharper than I'd intended, but it stopped her cold. I'd never used that tone with her before. Never in 30 years of marriage. It was the voice I reserved for doctors who were about to make mistakes with my patients. The voice that had saved lives because it brooked no argument. Ethan was the first to recover his composure, which told me everything I needed to know about how prepared he'd been for this moment. "Sophia, honey, this isn't what it looks like. Your father is obviously having some kind of breakdown. The stress of retirement, maybe early dementia." "Shut up." The words came from Sophia, and they were so quiet, so deadly calm, that we all turned to stare at her. My gentle daughter, who'd never raised her voice to anyone in her life, was looking at her husband with an expression I'd never seen before. "Just shut up, Ethan." She picked up the photograph with steady hands, studying it like she was trying to memorize every detail. The timestamp was clear. Tuesday, October 15th, 2:47 p.m. I knew she'd remember that date because it was the day she'd worked a double shift at the clinic. The day Ethan had told her he was helping his brother move. "How long?" she asked, still staring at the photo. Kaylin cleared her throat, trying to summon some version of the authority she once had in this house. "Sophia, this is between your father and me. You don't need to—" "I asked?" Sophia's voice was getting quieter, which somehow made it more terrifying. "How long have you been sleeping with my husband?" The silence stretched until it became unbearable. I could hear Mrs. Patterson's dog barking 3 houses down, could hear the hum of our refrigerator, could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. 8 months, I answered when it became clear neither of them would. At least 8 months that I can prove. Sophia's laugh was hollow, broken. "Our first anniversary was 9 months ago." She looked up at Ethan, who had gone pale beneath his carefully groomed exterior. "So you've been cheating on me for almost our entire marriage." "Sophia, please let me explain," Ethan started, but I cut him off by placing another document on the table. This one wasn't a photograph. It was a bank statement showing the transfer of $25,000 from our joint savings account to an account bearing only Ethan's name. The date was 6 weeks ago, right after I'd mentioned wanting to take that cruise to Alaska we'd been talking about for years. Kaylin's face went gray. "How did you get that?" "The same way I got these." I spread out more documents like I was dealing cards in a game where I held all the aces. Bank transfers totaling $87,000 over 8 months. Credit card statements showing expensive dinners, hotel rooms, jewelry purchases I'd never seen. And finally, the piece of paper that made Kaylin sink into her chair like all the air had been let out of her. "The deed transfer for our house. You put our house in his name," I said, my voice steady despite the rage burning in my chest. "The house we bought together when Sophia was 2 years old. The house where I've lived for 30 years. You signed it over to your son-in-law without telling me." Sophia stared at the deed transfer, her hands shaking now. "Mom, tell me this isn't real. Tell me you didn't steal Dad's house to give to the man you're sleeping with." "It's not stealing," Kaylin said weakly. "It's protecting assets. In case of divorce, the house would be safe." "Safe for who?" Sophia's voice cracked. "Safe for the man who's been lying to me since the day we got married? Safe for you and your lover while Dad ends up with nothing?" Ethan finally found his voice, though it came out shrill and desperate. "You don't understand the whole situation. Your mother and I, we have a connection. We understand each other in ways that—" Sophia was on her feet now, pacing like a caged animal. "You understand each other so well that you decided to steal from my father. You understand each other so well that you've been meeting in hotel rooms while I work overtime to pay bills." I watched my daughter's world crumble in real time. And part of me regretted having to do this to her. But she deserved the truth. She deserved to know that the man she'd pledged her life to had been calculating her destruction from the very beginning. "There's more," I said quietly, and 3 pairs of eyes turned to me with expressions of dread. Kaylin's voice was barely a whisper. "More?" I reached into the envelope again, but this time I didn't pull anything out. I just held it there, letting them imagine what other secrets I might have uncovered, what other betrayals I'd documented with the same meticulous care I once used to chart patient recoveries. The house transfer can be reversed, I said, addressing Kaylin directly. I know about it now, which means I can contest it. Fraudulent transfer of marital assets without spousal consent. My lawyer says it's a slam dunk case. Your lawyer? Ethan's voice was sharp with fear now. Oh yes, I said evenly. I've had legal representation for quite some time now. Amazing what you can accomplish when you're not wasting energy on a marriage that died 8 months ago. Kaylin tried one more time to regain control of the situation. Alexander, we can work this out. We don't need lawyers. We don't need to make this ugly. Ugly? I laughed, and it surprised me how genuine it sounded. You've been systematically stealing from me for 8 months while sleeping with our son-in-law. You put my father's watch on his wrist as if to taunt me at my own retirement party. You signed over our house without my consent. How much uglier could this possibly get? That's when I saw something shift in Ethan's expression. The mask of false innocence finally slipped completely, revealing the cold calculation underneath. He'd been caught, cornered, and now he was getting ready to fight back with whatever weapons he had left. You think you're so smart, he said, his voice dropping to something almost conversational. You think you figured everything out, but you have no idea what you're really dealing with. Sophia turned to stare at him, and I could see her recognizing something in his tone that she'd probably heard before but never understood. What's that supposed to mean? She asked. Ethan's smile was razor sharp. It means your precious father isn't the victim he's pretending to be. Tell them, Alex. Tell them about the pills. My blood turned to ice. His words hung in the air like poison gas, and I felt the familiar tightness in my chest that came with being cornered by someone who thought they held a winning card. The pills, he repeated, his voice gaining confidence as he watched my face. Go ahead, Alex. Tell Sophia and Kaylin about your little prescription problem. Sophia's face creased with confusion. Dad? What pills? What is he talking about? I could feel Kaylin's eyes on me, probably wondering if her lover had just handed her some kind of salvation from the wreckage of their exposed affair. But I kept my expression neutral, my hands steady, my voice calm. I think Ethan should explain what he means, I said quietly, since he seems to know so much about it. His smile widened, and I could see him preparing to deliver what he thought would be a killing blow. Your father has been stealing medication from the hospital for months. Oxycodone, Percocet, Ativan. I caught him with a whole bottle of pills he'd taken from the pharmacy. He's been popping them like candy, probably selling them too. The accusation was so outrageous, so completely fabricated, that for a moment I almost laughed. Almost. But then I saw Sophia's face, saw the seed of doubt his words had planted. And I realized this wasn't random desperation. This was a planned attack, something he'd been saving for exactly this moment. That's a serious accusation, Kaylin said slowly, and I could hear the hope in her voice. If I was a drug addict, if I was a thief, then maybe she wasn't the monster in this story. Maybe I was just as bad as she was. It's also completely false, I said, reaching into my jacket and pulling out my phone. But interesting that you would know about it, Ethan, since it never happened. His confidence flickered for just a moment, but he pressed on. I have photos. I documented everything because I was worried about you. Because I thought Sophia should know her father was... Show me. The simple request stopped him cold. What? Show me the photos. Show me this evidence you supposedly have of me stealing medication. I held up my phone. Because I have photos too. Would you like to see them? I swiped to the first image. Ethan at CVS Pharmacy talking to a young man behind the counter. The timestamp showed it was from 2 months ago during one of his supposed overtime shifts. That's Tommy Harris, I said conversationally. He's a pharmacy technician at CVS. He's also been selling prescription medications illegally for the past year. I know this because I reported him to the DEA 3 weeks ago. The color drained from Ethan's face so quickly I thought he might faint. See, the interesting thing about being a nurse for 35 years is that you develop a network. Other nurses, doctors, pharmacists, medical investigators. We talk to each other. We share information about suspicious activities, about people who might be abusing the system. I swiped to the next photo, showing Ethan exchanging money for a small bottle. When someone starts asking questions about my prescription habits, I tend to hear about it. Sophia was staring at her husband like she'd never seen him before. Ethan, what the hell is he talking about? Tommy Harris has been very cooperative with the DEA investigation, I continued, my voice still calm, still professional. He's provided a complete list of his illegal sales over the past year. Ethan's name appears 18 times, purchasing oxycodone and Percocet without valid prescriptions. Total street value of approximately $4,000. Kaylin looked like she was going to be sick. That's a federal crime. Yes, it is, I said. But here's the really interesting part. I swiped to another photo. This one showed Ethan meeting with a different man in a parking lot. Ethan wasn't just buying pills for personal use. He was reselling them. Marcus, my private investigator, followed him to several transactions. He's been dealing drugs to pay for those expensive dinners and hotel rooms with my wife. The silence in the room was absolute. Sophia had sunk into a chair, her head in her hands. Kaylin was staring at Ethan like he was a stranger, which in many ways he was. "That's not," Ethan started, but his voice came out as a whisper. "That's not what, sweetheart?" I asked, and the endearment came out like acid. "Not true? Not what you planned to happen? Not how you expected this evening to go?" I stood up, moving to the window, and looked out at the neighborhood I'd called home for 30 years. The neighborhood Kaylin had tried to steal from me. You see, when I hired Marcus to investigate the affair, I told him to find out everything. Not just about the adultery, but about who you really are, Ethan. What kind of person seduces his wife's father-in-law and systematically destroys a family? The drug dealing was actually a surprise, I continued, turning back to face them. I thought you were just a simple opportunist. I had no idea you were this entrepreneurial. Sophia finally looked up, her face ravaged. Is this why you married me? To get close to Mom? To get access to Dad's money? Ethan's mask was completely gone now, replaced by something cold and calculating. Your mother is a lonely fool who trusted everyone around her. And your father is a weak man who is desperate for attention from a younger partner. You're all so easy to manipulate, it's almost boring. The casual cruelty in his voice was breathtaking. He wasn't even pretending anymore. Wasn't even trying to salvage the situation. He was just letting us see who he really was underneath all the charming smiles and dutiful husband act. But he'd made one mistake. You assumed I would never fight back, I said, pulling out the final document from my envelope. You assumed 35 years of caring for other people had made me weak. The document was a restraining order signed by a judge that morning. Effective immediately, Ethan was banned from coming within 500 feet of me, my home, or my workplace. Any violation would result in immediate arrest. Ethan snatched the paper from my hands, scanning it with wild eyes. You can't do this. I live here. Sophia can make her own choices about her marriage, I said. But you will not be making those choices in my house. Because yes, it's still my house. The fraudulent deed transfer was voided this afternoon. My lawyer filed an emergency motion based on the evidence of your criminal activities and conspiracy to commit fraud. Kaylin finally found her voice. Alexander, please, we can go to counseling. We can... No, Kaylin, we can't. I looked at the woman I'd spent 30 years loving. The woman I'd trusted with my future, my security, my heart. Because this isn't about passion or midlife crisis or growing apart. This is about you choosing to systematically destroy me for a man who deals drugs and marries into families for money. I gathered up the photographs and documents, sliding them back into the envelope with steady hands. I'll be staying at my brother's house tonight. Kaylin, you have 24 hours to move your belongings out of my house. After that, you'll be trespassing. Her face crumpled. Where will I go? I really don't care, I said, and meant it. Maybe Ethan can share his jail cell with you. I'm sure you'll figure something out. As I walked toward the door, Ethan called after me, his voice sharp with desperation. You think you've won something? You think destroying your own family makes you strong? I turned back one last time, looking at this man who had thought he could strip me of everything, my dignity, my marriage, my security, even my father's memory. I didn't destroy this family, Ethan. I saved what was left of it. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my brother Daniel's spare bedroom, staring out at his garden while my phone buzzed with increasingly desperate messages from Kaylin. By 3:00 a.m., they had escalated from apologies to threats to pathetic pleas for forgiveness. I deleted each one without reading past the first line. At dawn, I made coffee and called Marcus. It's done, I told him when he answered on the second ring. They know about the affair, the money transfers, Ethan's drug dealing. Kaylin's moving out today. How did they take it? His voice was gentle, professional. Over the past months, he'd become more than just an investigator. He'd become a friend, someone who understood what it felt like to have your world systematically dismantled by people you trusted. About as well as you'd expect. But Marcus, there's something else. Something I didn't tell them last night because I wanted to process it first. There was a pause. What is it? I exhaled slowly, gripping the phone tighter. Ethan's been visiting an obstetrician in Scottsdale, Dr. Sarah Chen. I have the appointment records going back 3 months. Marcus's tone darkened. Your daughter? No, I said, my throat tightening. Kaylin. Silence stretched on the line. How far along? Approximately 4 months, based on the frequency of appointments and medical records I was able to access. My hands tightened around the coffee mug until I thought it might shatter. 4 months. Conception in June. June, when Kaylin and I had gone to marriage counseling, when she'd held my hand and promised we could work through our problems, when she'd made love to me and whispered that we'd find our way back to each other in retirement. She'd been sleeping with Ethan and carrying his child while lying to my face about saving our marriage. There's more, Marcus continued, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. Hospital records show this isn't Kaylin's first pregnancy. She had an abortion 2 years ago, about 6 months before Sophia married Ethan. The timing suggests it's possible Ethan was involved even then. If that's true, then their relationship predates his marriage to your daughter by at least half a year. The words hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't an affair that had developed over time. This was a calculated long-term plan. Ethan had been circling my family long before Sophia walked down the aisle. I need those medical records, I said. Already on their way to your lawyer. Marcus hesitated, his voice softer now. Alexander, I have to ask, what are you planning to do with this information? I looked out at Daniel's garden, at the roses his wife had tended for years, at the life they'd built with patience and care and honest work. I'm going to finish what I started. Sophia called me at 8 a.m., her voice hollow with exhaustion. Dad, can we talk? There are things I need to tell you. We met at a diner on the edge of town, the kind of place where the coffee was strong and the waitresses had seen enough of life not to ask questions about why a father and daughter both looked like they'd been through a war. She's pregnant, Sophia said without preamble, staring into her coffee like it might hold answers. 4 months, she told me last night after you left. I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. I know, sweetheart. She looked up, surprised. You know? I hired an investigator, remember? He's very thorough. I took a breath, steeling myself for what I had to tell her. Sophia, there's something else. Something about the timeline of Kaylin's relationship with Ethan. I watched her face as I explained about the previous pregnancy, about the medical records, about the possibility that Ethan and Kaylin's affair had been going on for over 2 years. With each revelation, something inside her seemed to break a little more. So she never loved him, Sophia said finally. Not even at the beginning. He was just cover, a way to get closer to you. I shook my head slowly. I don't know what was in her heart, but I know the facts, and the facts suggest this was never about love. Sophia laughed bitterly. You know what's funny? I actually thought about having kids with him. I brought it up a few months ago, said maybe we should start trying, and he got so angry. Said we weren't ready, that we needed to establish ourselves first. Now I know he already had Mom carrying his child. The pain in her voice was almost unbearable. My daughter, my gentle, trusting Sophia, who had built her life around people who had used her as a pawn in their twisted game. What happens now? She asked quietly. Now you decide what kind of life you want to have, I said. Independent of them, independent of their choices. You're 28 years old, Sophia. You have time to build something real with someone who actually loves you. And Mom, her voice cracked on the word. I thought about Kaylin, about 30 years of marriage, about the woman I'd thought I knew, and the stranger who'd been plotting with Ethan for years. Your mother made her choices. Now she gets to live with the consequences. That afternoon, I drove back to the house I'd shared with Kaylin for 3 decades. Her car was gone, but Ethan's Honda was parked in the driveway like he still belonged there. The restraining order said he couldn't come within 500 feet of me, but apparently, he was testing the boundaries. I called the police before I got out of my car. Officer Martinez arrived within 10 minutes, a young woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. Sir, do you want to press charges? I want him arrested, I said simply. The restraining order is clear. Ethan emerged from the house as the officer approached, his face pale but defiant. This is harassment. You can't arrest me for visiting my wife. Actually, I can arrest you for violating a restraining order, Officer Martinez replied calmly. The condition of your marriage doesn't exempt you from legal consequences. As they led Ethan to the patrol car, he turned back to me with one last desperate attempt at manipulation. That baby is yours, Alex. Are you really going to let your own grandchild grow up without family? I looked at this man who had spent years scheming against me, who had stolen my wife, my money, my security, and who now wanted to use an unborn child as a weapon against me. That child will have all the family it needs, I said quietly. Just not you. Later that evening, Kaylin finally came home. I was waiting for her in the living room, surrounded by the boxes I'd packed with her belongings. She looked older somehow, diminished, like a woman who'd finally realized the true cost of her choices. The police called, she said, not quite meeting my eyes. They said Ethan was arrested, violating a restraining order. He'll be out on bail tomorrow, but he's officially been charged now, along with the drug-dealing charges that are coming. She slumped into what used to be her favorite chair, the chair where she'd read bedtime stories to Sophia, where she'd sewn patches into my work scrubs, where we'd once dreamed about retirement together. I never meant for it to go this far, she whispered. What did you mean, Kaylin? My voice was steady, colder than I thought possible. When you started sleeping with our son-in-law? When you put our house in his name? When you carried his child while lying to me about saving our marriage? She flinched at each accusation, her face paling with every word. I was confused, lost. You were always so focused on work, on patience, on everyone else. Ethan made me feel young again, important, like I mattered. I shook my head slowly. Kaylin, I spent 35 years putting other people first. Patience, you, Sophia, this family. The one time I tried to focus on something for myself, my retirement, our future together, you decided to throw it all away for a man who was using you. Her eyes glistened. He loves me. I reached into the envelope one last time and pulled out a transcript. A recording Marcus had secured. Conversations between Ethan and his supplier, the man he'd been reselling pills to. Conversations where Ethan laughed about the pathetic old nurse who was easy to manipulate, who believed everything his wife told him, who handed over money like a trained dog. No, Kaylin, I said, holding the paper out for her to see. He doesn't love you. He never did. She read in silence, her face growing paler with each line. When she finished, she looked up at me with eyes full of something I hadn't seen in years. Fear. I've lost everything, haven't I? She whispered. Yes, I said simply, you have. What about the baby? Her voice broke. I stood up, smoothing down my shirt, preparing to leave the house that was mine again, the life that was mine again. That's between you and Ethan, and whatever lawyer you can afford after the drug charges. I'm done being responsible for the mess you've made. As I reached the door, she called after me one last time. Alex, please. We were married for 30 years. That has to count for something. I turned back to look at her. Really look at her one final time. It did count for something, Kaylin. It counted for everything. But you threw it away for a man who never loved you, who used you to destroy your own family, who's carrying your child as his final insurance policy against the consequences of his crimes. I picked up my jacket, the same jacket that had held the envelope that changed everything. 30 years counted for everything, until you decided they counted for nothing. Now you get to live with that choice. 6 months later, I stood in the garden behind my house, legally and completely mine again, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. The roses I'd planted years ago had never bloomed better, as if they too were celebrating their freedom from the poison that had seeped into this place. The legal proceedings had been swift and decisive. Ethan's drug charges had led to a plea bargain that included jail time and restitution. Kaylin's fraudulent transfer of assets had been completely reversed, and she'd been forced to return every penny she'd helped siphon out of our accounts, plus interest and legal fees. The house, the savings, the retirement funds I'd worked 35 years to build, every bit of it was mine again. But more importantly, my life was mine again. Sophia had filed for divorce the day after Ethan's arrest. The process had been complicated by Kaylin's pregnancy, but my daughter had shown a strength I'd never seen in her before. She'd refused to be manipulated by tears or threats, refused to let the fact of the baby cloud her judgment about the man who had betrayed her so deeply. I can't raise a child with someone I don't trust, she told me one evening over coffee. And I can't trust someone who's capable of what he did, to me, to you, to all of us. The baby was born in February. a little girl that Kaylin wanted to name Hope, as if the child's existence could somehow redeem the circumstances of her conception. Ethan had no say. He was behind bars. Sophia, though devastated, had no desire to raise her half-sister as her own child. She'd made peace with the fact that this baby, while tied to her by blood, was a product of betrayal, not a blessing. I hadn't seen the child, and I didn't plan to. Not yet. Maybe one day, when she was older and could understand the truth of her origins. But for now, my energy was focused on rebuilding rather than managing the wreckage others had created. Kaylin had moved to a small apartment across town, close enough to visit the baby, but far enough away that I didn't have to see her unless I chose to. She looked older every time I caught a glimpse of her in court, her beauty dimmed, her arrogance gone. She'd made her choices, and she was paying the price. Ethan, on the other hand, was paying in a different way. Behind bars, stripped of the control he had so smugly believed was his forever. And me? The most unexpected development had been my relationship with Marcus Webb, the private investigator who'd helped me uncover the truth. What started as a professional arrangement had become something deeper. We shared a dark sense of humor about human nature, a hard-earned wisdom about the things people were capable of when they thought no one was watching. "You know what I admire about you?" Marcus said over dinner one night. "You didn't let them break you. You got angry, you got even, you got justice. But you didn't let them poison you." He was right. Though it had taken months to realize it, I'd expected to feel more broken than I did. More damaged. Instead, I felt lighter, stronger. Like I'd finally washed off years of hidden dirt I hadn't even realized I was carrying. The retirement I'd planned with Kaylin, the traveling, the hobbies, the quiet domestic bliss, had been replaced by something better. Volunteering at a free clinic downtown, joining a book club where people actually discussed books, cooking for one without feeling lonely, making decisions without consulting anyone else. At 58, I had finally discovered what it felt like to live for myself. On this particular morning, as I trimmed back the rose bushes and pulled weeds from the flower beds that were finally thriving again, I heard a car pull into my driveway. Through the gate, I saw Marcus's truck, and I smiled despite myself. He'd taken to bringing me coffee on weekend mornings, not because I needed him to, but because he wanted to, because it made both of us happy in a simple, uncomplicated way. "Morning, Alex," he called as he came through the garden gate carrying 2 cups from the coffee shop downtown. "How are the roses?" "Spectacular," I said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "I think they're as happy to be free of the drama as I am." We sat together on the porch swing I had built years ago, back when I still believed Kaylin and I would grow old here in peace. For a while, I considered removing it, erasing all traces of her from my home. But then I realized I didn't need to. This was my porch, my swing, my house. I wouldn't let betrayal rob me of the good things I'd built, just because she had once been part of them. "Any word from your lawyer about Kaylin's appeal?" Marcus asked. "Denied," I said, sipping my coffee. "She'll serve the full 18 months. Her lawyer tried to argue that the pregnancy and new baby were mitigating circumstances, but Judge Patterson wasn't buying it." Marcus chuckled. "Patterson has no patience for people who prey on their own families. Good thing you went about this legally. You might have been tempted to handle things another way." I smirked. "I did handle it another way, Marcus. I handled it my way. Methodically, carefully, and completely." He gave me that look he often did, half admiring, half wary. It was actually beautiful to watch. Terrifying, but beautiful. I leaned back against the swing, letting the morning sun warm my face. "You know what the strangest part is? I'm grateful it happened." His eyebrows rose. "Grateful?" "Not for the betrayal, not for the pain, but grateful that I found out who Kaylin really was before I wasted any more years on her. Grateful that I discovered I was stronger than I thought. Grateful that I learned the difference between being alone and being lonely." I gestured toward the garden, toward the house that was finally peaceful, toward the life I had rebuilt from the ashes. If Kaylin had been a better liar, if Ethan had been smarter about hiding his tracks, I might have spent the rest of my life married to a woman who didn't love me, watching a man like him dismantle my family while I pretended everything was fine. Instead, I'm 58 years old, and I finally know what it feels like to be valued for who I am, not for what I can provide. Marcus reached over and took my hand. It was simple, unforced, steady, caring without complication. I'm grateful for that knowledge, I said softly, even if it came at a terrible price. He squeezed my hand gently. So what happens next? I thought about his question, about the blank page of a future stretched out before me. For 30 years, my future had been tied to Kaylin's choices, Kaylin's dreams, Kaylin's timeline. Now it was mine alone to write. Next, I said with a quiet certainty, I live. I wake up every morning in a house that belongs to me. I make decisions based on what makes me happy. And I never again mistake someone's need for me with their love for me. That sounds like a good plan. It is, I agreed, watching a pair of cardinals weave a nest in the oak tree Ethan once said he'd cut down because it blocked too much light. It's the best plan I've ever made. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, burning off the last of the morning mist, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, complete peace with my choices. The envelope that had started everything was long gone, its contents having served their purpose. The documents were filed away with my lawyer. The photographs were evidence in cases now closed. The truth had been told, and justice had been served. What remained was this: a man who had learned that betrayal, while devastating, wasn't permanent. That trust, once broken, could be rebuilt with people who deserved it. That love, real love, was possible, even after you discovered that what you thought was love had been nothing more than selfishness dressed as devotion. At 58, I was finally free to find out who I was when I wasn't busy being what everyone else needed me to be. And that, I realized, was the most beautiful discovery of my life. Now I'm curious about you, listening to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever lived through something like this? Comment below. I'd love to know how far this story reaches. And while you think about that, I'll leave on the final screen 2 other stories from this channel that I know will surprise you. Thank you for staying until the end.